I actually started at USM in 2005 as a full-time student, and I graduated in 2009 with my BA in art with an entrepreneurial studies concentration, also concentrating in printmaking. At that point, most of the work I was doing, it was really concentrating on the two-dimensional, kind of flat, traditional printmaking image. These are two pieces I made during that time. The yellow one is a screen print, and this other one is a digital print that's a collage of 9 different plates that all have multiple printmaking techniques in them: dry point, monotypes, sheen collé. I was experimenting with all kinds of different techniques and combining them. In one of my classes, I got shown Tara Donovan's rubber band prints, and those really had a big impact on me. I loved that the power of the repeated element over and over again, and it's such a simple element, just the rubber band that's been inked up. But these really had a big impact on me and definitely impacted the work that I made. This is a monoprint that's a full sheet of BFA paper, so it's 22 by 30 inch sheet. And then this led to this piece, which is a 42.5-foot screen print of blue blazes. Again, just the repeated blue blaze. Both of those pieces were inspired by when you're hiking on the trail, and that's how you kind of mark where you go. You go from blue blaze to blue blaze to blue blaze, and you just keep going. So later on in my senior year, back in 2009, I got to go to the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston and see her sculpture and installation work. Again, this is Tara Donovan. And there's still that repeated pattern that you find in her prints and in printmaking. It's still about the multiple, but it's the multiple thing. This piece is a whole wall the size of this wall that's made entirely of drinking straws. And this was another one that was there. And it's just sheets of mylar that are twisted on top of each other and pull in the walls so the light comes through. And all of her work is this repeating of the object, repeating of a pattern to make these pieces. So I was doing in my own work mostly traditional two-dimensional prints. But I did get an opportunity that same year to start to work with taking two-dimensional prints and putting them in a three-dimensional world. This is the visiting artist in residence, Michelle Forsyth, and I was part of the team that made the canopy. All of those little pieces were cut out, screen printed, and we cut them out and assembled these tiny little pieces and put them all on the ceiling. So they were made from two-dimensional prints into three-dimensional objects, installed in a three-dimensional space, but the way it was installed was referencing a two-dimensional image. So it was really kind of that back and forth between three-dimensional and 2D. So coming back from my BFA, I was really interested in exploring a little bit more the three-dimensional world and how it can still relate to printmaking. This is one of the pieces I made coming back, and they're orange peels, clementine peels that I unpeeled, ran with ink, put them under the press onto fabric, and then cut them up and stitched them back together and stuffed them so they're the exact size and shape of the clementine. This piece was also important because fabric and sewing is something I've been doing my whole life, and something I was in a household that sewing was always a part of our life. But it doesn't always work its way into my fine art, and that's something I've been wanting to explore as well. Coming back this time around and getting my BFA, the Book Arts program has been a big part of this for me. And it's a perfect medium for two-dimensional printmaking made into a three-dimensional object. This is a tunnel book that I made, but also I made standalone prints of at the same time. So you've got your 2D image, but also your 3D object. The books also allowed me to start incorporating my own writing into some of my work. This is another piece that was made for the book arts program here. That's got my own writing and some prints. This is a piece by Erin Sweeney. I got to go to Haystack last summer and do 2 weeks, and she was the professor and definitely was the right person for me to study with at that time. Her BFA is actually in sculpture, and then her MFA is in book arts and printmaking. And she does these installations that are playful and use fabric and book and sculptural elements, but also prints. And so she was a really good person for me to study with at this point. This is the book that I made after or during that time at Haystack. It's a Chinese sewing box book made with multiple masu boxes that unfold, and the poem is inside. You discover the poem as you open up the book. Like John, I've also taken this opportunity to take some more photography. Something that's been interesting is how I go about my photography almost in a similar way that I go about printmaking. I investigate things through repetition, through pattern, through multiples of the same object. And part of that photography project I was doing, taking interviews of my mother and my grandmother, and had video and audio that was supposed to be source material for a book that I was making. You can't hear the audio, but you can get the idea. And I discovered through that process that actually the video and the audio was the work, part of the work itself, and became its whole new thing. So it was interesting that my source material suddenly became part of the work. And for those of you who saw the BFA show, you'll recognize this. That video became an element in my installation, along with over 50 fishing flies that were my illustrations of my grandfather's fishing flies. Like the video, these illustrations actually were originally just part of the process of making a traditional screen print, and at some point realized, no, these are actually a product themselves. These are inkjet prints on paper that were then cut up and mounted at different heights away from the wall. So it kind of goes back to the print. This is one of these screen prints, 12-color screen prints that was made from those illustrations of the fishing flies. And going forward, I'm looking to explore other media and using the best tools that's available for the content that I'm trying to work with at that point. But it's often always rooted in ideas that I like about being a printmaker. Repetition and process and the multiple. And I still go back to printmaking, and I still love printmaking, but for me, printmaking isn't like a self-contained bubble that like limits what I can do, but I want to use it as like a jumping off point to explore other ways of working as I move forward. That's my presentation.
How do your relationships inform your work?
Relationships with people, particularly in the last couple of pieces. The way I do my work through that pattern and repetition and multiple images has kind of allowed me to think about relationships. I'm not usually a particularly emotional person, so having that kind of level of separation by going through these fishing flies and pulling and making the digital illustrations and then making the silk screenings allows me to kind of investigate the relationship between me and my father and me and my grandfather. And same with the sewing items in photography. And when I stitch into different fabric items and paper items and stitch back into my prints, it definitely relates back to family history and